Logic Pro 10 includes several different marker types, which are extremely useful when scoring music to video. I'll press G to reveal my global tracks. We can see we have a marker track and a movie track, where I've already imported a movie from Final Cut Pro 10. If I skim through it, we can see it play in this floating window here. But the movie track lets us identify sections by thumbnails. One type of marker in Logic are scene cuts. From the Movie Global Track pop-up, I can choose Create Marker Set from Scene Cuts. Logic will analyze the video and identify anytime there's a change in scene. These scene markers are locked to picture as indicated by the lock icon. And a scene marker is added every time there's a transition in the video. This gives us a quick overview to identify how many different scene cuts we have and helps us think about how to score the video. For example, we can see there are a series of very fast cuts in this section. You can have multiple sets of markers in Logic. From the pop-up menu under Marker Sets, I'll choose this one I already created, Key Beats. These are regular markers that are added manually in order to identify sections where I want the music to change. As you can see, they can be named, they can be colored. Option C brings up the color palette where you can choose a color for each of them. And they can be edited once added. Regular markers are great, but they do have a limitation. I'm going to create a new track and add a virtual drummer to my project. Doing so adds a single drummer region, which I can then trim to match my marker. I can then option drag out another copy, and in this way I can build separate stylistic pieces for the arc of my video. However, there's a better way. I'm going to delete this drummer track. Then from the marker pop-up menu, I'm going to choose Convert to Arrangement Markers. As opposed to regular markers, arrangement markers are locked to the beat of the project. You can see that each arrangement marker changes on a specific beat. So here we have the second measure, the third beat. That's why arrangement markers may not exactly match the starting and ending point of your regular markers. However, here's a great benefit. I'll create my drummer track again. This time, I get individual drummer regions that exactly match each of my arrangement markers, both in duration and with a name. And because this is a virtual drummer, there are automatically fills added that transition from one region to the next. From here, I can go into the Virtual Drummer Editor and modify each region to make it more unique. If you found this tip helpful, check out our brand new Warp Speed Logic tutorial at rippletraining.com.